Hello and welcome to 10 with the Text. My name is Pastor Tom Cadle from Christ Lutheran Church in Culpsville, Pennsylvania. And 10 with the Text is a weekly video Bible study in which we look at the text that's coming up on the Lutheran list of readings, the lectionary, and take a look at the gospel text that we'll be hearing in church on that Sunday. And the purpose here is to sort of enrich our hearing of that text and perhaps also to enrich our hearing of a sermon that might be based on that text. Today we're going to look at the text for the 13th Sunday after Pentecost. That's August 30th, 2009. And the passage we're going to look at is from the 7th chapter of Mark, verses 1 to 8, and then 14 and 15, and finally concluding with verses 21 to 23. Well, we're back this week into the Gospel of Mark after having been in the Gospel of John now for the past 5 weeks. And we're going to stay now with Mark for quite a while, up through the middle part of November. So as we get set to get our feet really wet again in the Gospel of Mark, let me just remind you of a few things that we said in some earlier Bible studies about this Gospel. It is the earliest one written, probably most people think around the year 65 AD. And written to Gentile Christians, probably in the city of Rome. And all that has a bearing on how Mark tells his story, because the year before, let's say 64 AD, was the year that in Rome they had that great fire that you've probably read about in your history books, a fire that was initially blamed on Emperor Nero, and later on Nero turned all of that and blamed the Christians, and that began a real time of persecution for Christians, beginning in Rome and then spreading out throughout the whole Roman Empire. So he's writing to a church that's beginning now to experience some very severe difficulties and some very severe persecutions. It's also a time, as Mark writes, that Christianity and Judaism are coming to be seen as two separate expressions of religion. Up until about this time, Christianity was seen sort of as a subset of Judaism. These would be the folks that are still Jewish, but they believe in a certain way. They believe in this Messiah who came to them in this certain way. It's a time of great unrest for the Christians, as I'm saying. A year after Mark writes this gospel, the Jews and Rome will go to war against one another, and that's going to last until the early 70s AD. So this is a time of some real ferment and some real turmoil. So all of this is background to Mark's gospel, and we're going to see a little bit of that reflected right in this text that we look at today. In the end, this is a powerful and timely text for us in 2009, yet it's a text that has been misread by a lot of people over a large span of time, and we're going to try to point out where that misreading comes from and how we can avoid reading it in a way other than we should be intended to. On the surface, this little passage doesn't really appear all that timely. It's about Jewish dietary laws and ritual cleanliness and ritual uncleanliness. But beneath that, we're going to see that there's a great deal to say to us. Now this week I'm going to start doing something different, if you've been with me on some previous Bible studies, in that I'm not going to read the full text for you, because that just sort of takes up a big chunk of the 10 minutes that we got, and that's the reason I've been running over so regularly over these past weeks. But what I am going to do is right now ask you to hit the little pause button right below my picture here, and read that passage itself for yourself, and then have your Bible ready to refer to as we go through it. Once again, this is Mark chapter 7, verses 1 to 8, then verses 14 and 15, and then verses 21 to 23. Okay, go ahead and hit that little pause button right now. Well, as you see, in this passage, some Pharisees and scribes have come to Galilee looking for Jesus. And right off the bat, that signals us that something is up, because generally traffic went the other way. People in Jerusalem didn't go out into the outer regions all that often unless there was some particular purpose for that. And we know that the particular purpose, at least according to Mark in the earlier chapters of his gospel, is that the scribes have already determined that Jesus is demonic, and the Pharisees have begun and entered a plan to kill him. So all of this is in the background. And what happens when we get to our passage is that these scribes and Pharisees confront Jesus about the dietary mishaps, you might say, of his disciples, in that they're not eating or not washing their food before they eat it. Now here's where we need to pause and make sure that we read the gospel text properly. Over the years, this has been read as a diatribe against the Jews, and in many ways could certainly be seen that way, but it's hardly that really at all. It's really Jesus teaching about what makes a person right with God. The Jewish faith had very strict laws, the Torah, which gave very specific instruction on how to remain in a right relationship with God. To that then got added what Jesus or Mark refers to here as the tradition of the elders. The tradition of the elders were those not necessarily formal laws, but informal laws, which grew out of the formal laws. A good example of such a thing would be if you are of an older generation, you might remember that there were days when it just seemed totally improper for one to come to church not dressed up, for women not to wear hats on their heads, for men not to wear ties. And this was a way of just respecting God, respecting being in the presence of God. But as if somebody would have come then dressed like many do now in casual clothes, perhaps even shorts and sandals, it would have been interpreted by those folks who were following these traditions of the elders, if you will, that they were not being respectful of God. And those kinds of things sort of come and go in all faiths, and yet it plays an important role here because the cleansing of the food that the scribes and Pharisees were attacking Jesus about wasn't part of the Torah, but it was part of this tradition of the elders that had grown out of certain practices within the Torah, but now it becomes sort of a law all unto themselves. Jesus, as you'll notice, as he replies to them, he says, they just say to him, "Why do your disciples not live according to the tradition of the elders, but eat with defiled hands?" And Jesus goes on to quote a passage from the prophet Isaiah, in which he criticizes them as hypocrites. "The people honors me with their lips, but their hearts are far from me." And then he goes on to say in verse 14, "Then he called the crowd again and said to them, 'Listen to me, all of you, and understand. There is nothing outside a person that by going in can defile, but the things that come out are what defile.'" Now this was really turning that whole Jewish practice upside down. And it had to do, again, with the question of how does one get into and stay into a right relationship with God. In the Jewish faith, particularly as the Pharisees practiced it, it had everything to do with doing the right things that would please God and certainly not offend God, and then you were in control of that righteous relationship with God. And Jesus has all along been teaching something quite different. He's been teaching that the right relationship with God comes as a gift from God, not something that we create all on our own. The Pharisees were not necessarily bad people whatsoever, but they had this firm belief that that is in fact how the law was lived out. So, as Jesus replies to the Pharisees here, he says it's what comes out of a person that defiles a person, puts them in a bad relationship with God, rather than all of these rituals, these traditions of the elders. And he finally finishes up in verses 21 and 22 saying, "For it is from within, from the human heart, that evil intentions come: fornication, theft, murder, adultery, avarice, wickedness, deceit, licentiousness, envy, slander, pride, folly. All these evil things come from within, and they defile a person." So as you hear this text on Sunday morning, please hear it in the right way. This is not something against Jewish people in general by any means. It is a clarification on the part of Jesus about what puts and keeps a person in the right relationship with God. And we hope this little Bible study today has helped you prepare to listen to this gospel on Sunday morning with fresh ears and a fresh way of letting it change your life. Until next week, once again, I'm Tom Cadle with 10 for the Text. Thanks for watching.